welcome back and good morning to the next panel on our America's Future Series session. We're discussing unlocking the value of commercial space assets. Really excited about the panel that we've got together today. We've got Scott Scheimreif from Iridium, the Executive Vice President of Government Programs, Kevin Steen, the CEO of OneWeb Technologies, and Sam Visner of both Space ISAC and a Senior Tech Fellow at the Aerospace Corp. Welcome.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to start off with, before we dig in, going to each of you for a quick background on yourself, your organization, with particular focus towards how you fit into the greater vision of commercial space assets operating alongside military capabilities. Scott, I'd like to kick it to you first for a quick introduction.
Sure. Again, thank you, Dan, for having me. So I joined Iridium in 2000, so 21-year career here now. At the time, I was brought on to focus specifically on our U.S. government military support. Today, our organization has grown to be a pretty big, significant role within the Iridium company. Team of about 15, 16 individuals that support what once was the commercial SATCOM group at ADISA, now U.S. Space Force. So we make up a pretty big percentage of the overall revenue of the company. And obviously, U.S. government DoD is a primary focus area for us.
Thanks. And then, Kevin, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thanks for having me. My name is Kevin Steen. Been in the satellite industry coming up on 14 years now. I'm the CEO at OneWeb Technologies. We are a proxy company, part of the Eutelsat OneWeb group. Focus is the U.S. government, big focus on the U.S. DoD. So managed service provider for LEO connectivity. We provide and support the missions for the U.S. government. We have a secure NOC down in Houston, Texas, on the behind secure perimeter fence at Ellington Field, 24/7, staffed with cleared personnel. So we offer value-added services to the OneWeb LEO constellation, secure government interconnects, providing a bunch of support levels for the U.S. DoD to support their missions, as well as some high customer touch and some NRE and bespoke custom solutions for them. And then we recently awarded on the PLEO contracts, we have a host of distribution partners that we team up with for hybrid architectures, which we're going to talk about today. So we have a secure, resilient architecture and offering in the market by the nature of our architecture, of our constellation, as well as by what we do here at OneWeb Technologies. So proud to do this. Very, very thrilled to be on this panel today. It's pretty exciting and the topic's pretty relevant. So looking forward to this, Daniel.
And then Sam, over to you.
Thank you, Dan. I'm pleased and honored to be on this panel as well. I'm Sam Visner, and I wear a couple of hats. I'm a tech fellow with the Aerospace Corporation, a federally funded research and development center. I work on the cybersecurity and resilience of space systems, largely from a policy and operational issue. But what consumes the bulk of my time is my role as chairman of the board of directors of the Space Information Sharing and Analysis Center, which is industry's real-time operational capability to monitor the security environment affecting space systems, including commercial space systems, and to alert our members and to alert the industry as to threats, events, issue recommendations regarding mitigations, and to share information about these events, mitigations, best practices. We have a very active set of working groups, information sharing, analysis, exercises, policy, you name it. I've been in this role for a few months, having been vice chair of the board of directors for a couple of years. I've run a couple of cyber businesses. I didn't grow up in the space business. I grew up as an intelligence officer and eventually chief of signals intelligence programs at the National Security Agency. But as director of the National Cybersecurity Federally Funded Research and Development Center, sponsored by NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, I found myself more and more involved in looking at the issues related to the security of our cybersecurity of our space systems, and that became sort of my overarching professional passion. So today we have at the Space ISAC over 100 members. We have international relationships with Japan, with countries in Europe, with the Commercial Space Office and Space Systems Command, and other parts of the U.S. government. So we're clearly growing very quickly, and we are operating very much at the intersection of commercial and national security space. It is our position that our space systems in totality are a critical infrastructure sector, that our national and economic security, which are today highly related, are a critical infrastructure, are supported by this critical infrastructure sector, and that this critical infrastructure sector needs to be safeguarded. I've been excited by the role that commercial space is playing in support of national and economic security. The work, of course, that Iridium is doing, that OneWeb is doing, Black Sky, Hawkeye 360, Maxar, Planet Labs, and others. And I would note that our country's ability to support our international commitments, for example, what we're doing on behalf of Ukraine, is manifested in large part by the work of commercial space companies that are playing a vital role in supporting that country's struggle with Russia. And I would also note, Dan, that in the war that Russia initiated against Ukraine, before any Russian troops crossed the border, the first thing Russia did was attack a commercial space system used by the Ukrainians and others, this being Viasat. So the need to treat our commercial space systems as a national asset has never been clearer. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the introductions, and really excited to have a group of such knowledgeable folks joining us for the discussion today. I'd like to jump straight into it. One of the things that we've seen a lot out in the public eye, and Sam alluded to just here, is the increased focus on resilience in general, and particularly when it comes to cyber resilience. How does the evolving threat landscape impact the way we think about commercial space assets? And how have the government needs changed as a result of this increased focus on the changing threat landscape? And Scott, I'll kick it over to you to start.
Yeah, so great question. Obviously, one that's been prominent now for a number of years. I go back, as I alluded to earlier, having joined Iridium in 2000, and saw the support that we provided to our government during Operation Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom, and looked at the threat that existed then, and looking at counterinsurgency and a global war on terrorism, and how the government utilized not just my network but other commercial satellite networks as well. And then all of a sudden, the world changed, and we shifted from the threat that existed then to the near peer adversary threat we have today, which has changed everything. And the intelligence and the acumen and the technology of the threats that exist today far exceed that what was in place during the 2000s. So with that, industry has had to change as well, or evolve as well. And so, and how our warfighters execute and fight and support their missions. And so with that, as you alluded to, the need for diversity, resiliency has become much greater than what it was in the past. Our government has, and our customer base and our market has basically made us aware of that. And I think it's forced us to take on a much stronger position and focus on how we deal with cybersecurity, electronic warfare, which is, I think, has been necessary. So that is, as you mentioned, the landscape has changed, which has forced industry as well as our military to adjust.
I think it's a great point, right? And it kind of brings up the partnership that we're starting to see, right? But there's certainly been adjustments required on both the government side and the commercial side to kind of keep pace with the changing threat landscape. Kevin, thoughts from you?
Yeah, I was just thinking about what Scott, you were saying is that's absolutely true. As such has changed, because also think about historically the U.S. military, their knowledge and use of SATCOM exceeded any other nation relative to defense. So as other nations caught up and understood, they started to understand things about SATCOM that they never knew before, right? So now they understood the significance to others, how to attack it, if you will, and how to use it themselves. So they learned in those years since you just described. That was one that was kind of the learning or the thought I had as you were talking. And then I think that as you were alluding to, Scott, is that from a commercial SATCOM usage, the U.S. military's usage of it has skyrocketed over the past several years. And so things that we as commercial SATCOM providers had to do. We didn't have to do these things in the past. They weren't problems for us. The U.S. military solved them in different ways, whether it was through WGS and others, right? They weren't asking us to solve these things, but now they see the value in leveraging commercial SATCOM. But in the same vein, they need us to be more resilient, more cyber secure. So it's forcing us, or not forcing us, sorry, it's an opportunity for us to step up and meet that need. But the requirements needs are kind of different than things we saw in the past. Yeah, we had to prevent against, hackers and things like that, but this is a whole new level. And so it's a learning for us, but I think it's a great way for us to apply our commercial knowledge and speed of development to get it done in that time frame. I think you see the commercial industries willing to accept this challenge. These are new problems to solve, and these are highly smart technical people who love a challenge. You tell them it can't be done, that's what they want to work on first. And so the embracing of solving this challenge is both technologically interesting to people, and then, for those that are the patriots who want to serve their country and support the mission, it's very exciting for them. So I think, Daniel, it's changed the way companies invest, right? We're spending more money on cyber, if you will, than we had previously ever spent. We're spending more on resiliency by its nature. It was driven by commercial resiliency at first, but now the resiliency requirements from the US DoD are at another level, and it's pushing us to deliver a better product that in the reverse, commercial markets are going to benefit from. I think of it in one way, Daniel, as the commercial terrestrial world is used to X9s, 5 nines in their terrestrial network, right? We're going to get there on the satellite side from a resiliency perspective, and it's going to need to have a cyber approach that rivals or exceeds even banking. When you think about the information that is attractive to bad actors of what's in our network, right? The bar is known in the terrestrial world, and we're going to have to get there. Fortunately, we can leverage certain commercial technologies to speed our way to that answer.
I love that. I love that answer, right? And I love the callback to banking as an example, right? Of one of those great places where kind of commercial innovation has had to scale and be prepared to deal with state level threat actors at a level similar to what the satellite industry is facing. So I think a very relevant example there. Sam, a couple of thoughts from you on this.
Well, let me foot stomp what Scott and Kevin have already said. Let me note that regardless of the requirements that government might levy on the commercial space sector, given the increased dependence of our national security on commercial space systems, those systems are frankly facing a very different kind of threat. I mean, what happened in Ukraine right at the beginning of the conflict is evidence of this. And the Russians have said that commercial space systems used by Ukraine to defend itself are now legitimate military targets. So this means that commercial space systems have frankly a somewhat of a target painted on their back, whether they like it or not. And I think it's heartening to hear the recognition that Kevin and Scott have shown us. And I think industry gets it, both in terms of the work that individual companies are doing and the number of companies that have joined the Space ISAC and are working collaboratively in our cyber vulnerability lab, that are participating in our watch center, that are working on our information sharing and analyst working groups and technology working groups. So it's evident that companies are absolutely sensitive to this and playing this and doing their part increasingly to defend these space systems. And I would note, in addition to all of this, that as one looks at these commercial space systems, there are aspects of them that are very encouraging. For example, the proliferation of systems in low Earth orbit, companies that are building not only highly proliferated systems, but systems that are redundant. It means that in addition to our national security systems, we have commercial systems that are increasingly difficult. You might damage them, but you can't take them out of action. They're diverse. They have redundancy built in. And these systems are iterative. Some companies are launching satellites frequently enough so that if satellites are damaged or they become unusable or they wear out or they become obsolete, rather than bemoaning that fact, they can be replaced. And I would note that I think slowly but surely government is beginning to learn the message, maybe not slowly, but certainly surely the messages of this iterative approach to building constellations. I've seen the work that the Space Development Agency is doing in the Space Systems Command, and I'm very encouraged by them taking an approach of, instead of a few large exquisite systems is a set of highly proliferated constellations that can be reiterated and launched more frequently and that are more resistant because they are, in fact, more numerous. So I think that what industry is doing is going to benefit from in several ways.
I agree with that entirely, right? And it's been a useful pathfinder, right? Especially when you talk about cyber, the ability to kind of iteratively field new capabilities, means that you're fielding modern hardware. You can take a little bit more risk with less of the lens towards fielding hardware with flight heritage, which means the latest and greatest cybersecurity features baked in, a whole lot more flexibility. I think an excellent point there. The next topic I want to jump into really is the hybrid space vision that we've seen put forward from the U.S. Space Force. And I think it's a topic that just about everybody sees and agrees with in principle, but anyone who's ever built or designed a satellite system understands that there's a whole lot more under the hood to build these frequency flexible, constellation flexible terminals, maintain that, organize it, maintain a common operational picture of all those terminals in the field. Clearly an important task to be tackled, but one that comes with its fair share of challenges. Can you guys talk a little bit about how you see yourselves fitting into that vision and some of the challenges that you're up against and solving? And Kevin, I'll start with you for this time around.
Certainly. So clearly we believe and strive that vision, right? That opportunity is heart and soul of what we're becoming with the combination of Eutelsat and OneWeb group, right? So you see from a hybrid architecture, we're all in on it, literally. And I think that from the challenges that we face, I think there's certain things that we see are pretty straightforward, right? Getting a terminal to, either two terminals that can talk LEO GEO together with an SDN sitting behind with load balance and things like that, or a single terminal that can go back and forth, right? Those things you can easily wrap your mind around. We're doing demos on that today. But the challenges we face is, number one, how do you give the U.S. military the flexibility so you don't paint them into a proprietary architecture? Because that's not what they want. So we've chosen an open architecture. But as I looked through some of the thoughts that we had shared earlier, Daniel, and some of the prior discussions we've had, when you think of how this is going to interoperate with other constellations, okay, we're going to go from our own proprietary, if you will, LEO GEO constellation is part of Eutelsat and OneWeb, but how are we going to talk to other constellations? How is that going to work? And I believe a standards-based approach is the only way to do it. But agreeing on those standards and what they are and how you're going to do it, because then once you do that, you give up your secret sauce, your differentiation, your profit, right? Your obligation to your shareholders. How do you balance that? So I think one challenge is, how do we make that magic happen between constellations? So as I think of, JADC2 and others, they mandate and they want interoperability. How do you get that to happen? And then I think of, in that hybrid architecture, while everyone sees the value of it, right? And I think the industry will bring the right terminals to bear. It's going to happen. They're already doing it in the partnership and in the ecosystem. But as you start to work through that, and what the U.S. military is looking for is the ability to be ready without necessarily having to lock in all that bandwidth. So how do you give them reserved bandwidth, if you will, or surge bandwidth? And are they comfortable contracting that way? So our challenges are, how we can meet those interoperability requirements from a standards base, and then the new commercial dynamic that the U.S. military is going to have to jump to really entice and encourage and incent the commercial world to deliver what they want, because their historical contracting process and funding process has been very CapEx oriented, kind of money, but they're making the shift to more OpEx O&M kind of money, but making that transition is not going to be easy for them. And there's a bit of a chicken and the egg around the investment side of it. So those challenges range in those topics, and I'll pause there because I could go on for a while about this, but I don't want to hog the airtime.
No, those are a couple of great points. And I always love coming back to that, kind of capitalization challenge, because it's not just the investment, but it's actually turning over the equipment in the field. At the end of the day, that life cycle is quite extensive sometimes, and something that you have to be mindful of. Scott, I know this has been near and dear to your heart for quite a while. Can you talk a little bit about what you and the Iridium team have been working on there?
Yeah. Before I answer that, I'll kind of go back a little bit in time as well. I remember, in the 2000s, where I would sit in multiple conferences, and I won't name names of the flag officers that would sit and speak about, what the demand was coming from, or I should say the supply coming from the commercial satellite being, roughly 80%. That was always the number that was thrown out there. 80% of the SATCOM is coming from commercial, and we, the government, really need to move away, and become less dependent on commercial. And as a commercial operator, obviously you don't want to hear that. You want to, what you want to hear is, what can we do to be more relevant? What can we do to make you more satisfied, comfortable in use of our network? And, I'd say, over the last, 10 years, that has shifted. You talk about this hybrid network with a reliance on commercial and military. The culture coming out of the building and coming out of the warfighting community is recognizing now that they need to rely on commercial. They can't build networks fast enough. They can't get enough satellites up there quick enough. They need to have the resiliency. I forget, Sam, you talked about it, so that if something was to happen with one bird, there's another bird right behind it. And so, and that was, sort of kicked off General Raymond's vision of integrated SATCOM enterprise. And so that's good to see that. Now where do we go from here? I think there's a responsibility, from a government standpoint to kind of create the acquisition strategy that allows commercial or that incentivizes commercial to want to actively engage in that, and a responsibility on industry to, I think you mentioned it, Kevin, to take a look at our own networks in-house. And, if I was on the other side of the table and I was going to rely on my network, I want to make sure that I had some visibility, some transparency into that. The creation of the commercial integration cell years ago was a way to get industry network operators at the table to have a voice in the ops center. And so that was a great step. So we've come a long way. But Kevin, as you alluded to, I don't think it's not a technical hurdle. It's a culture, continues to be a cultural hurdle, and now an acquisition hurdle that I think both sides want to address. But I think there's more focus there now than there ever was.
It's clear, and you see, quite a bit of effort invested in trying to turn some of those processes around. But it's a big aircraft carrier, and that procurement machine isn't going to change quickly. Yep. Sam, a couple of thoughts from you.
Well, I'm excited by the development of these hybrid systems. I think it gives our national security missions and other missions, and conceivably our civil missions, far more redundancy. Think about hyperspectral imaging and the ability to gain information about the Earth from a wider variety of sources, which I think is absolutely fantastic. There are certain challenges. The life cycle, the design, engineering, and life cycle approach used to some of the commercial systems is likely to be different from government systems. So synchronizing life cycles, I think, will be an interesting challenge. Another interesting challenge will be synchronizing which operational requirement goes to which system, and how you make sure that from the perspective of the user, this is seamless, that it's transparent. Yeah. But I also think those are operational issues that we can conquer. I don't think those, and I agree with my colleagues here, I don't think those are highly technological issues. I think those are programmatic issues in terms of synchronizing acquisition and engineering, and I think that they are operational issues in terms of synchronizing and harmonizing their use. But I don't see why that can't be done. And in fact, as I make my way around the national security community, I think there is increasing interest, in fact, in making it happen, and I think it's consistent with where General Raymond's vision is trying to take us.
Yeah, absolutely right, and really the shift towards procuring more of those things as a true service, right, where that innovation can continue to move forward at the commercial pace rather than locked into a validated set of requirements. Yep. I think is a key part of that, right? And we've seen some progress, but certainly still some more work to do. When you look at how things were laid out at the front end, Space Force put 5 core attributes for their enterprise SATCOM vision: rapid, resilient, sustainable global access to SATCOM, terminal and modem agility, network agility, cyberlink, and operational security, and then data interoperability. And each one of those is probably a difficult topic to tackle all on its own. Can you guys talk a little bit about how you're thinking about those fulfilling those core tenets and core requirements as part of your system design, and how commercial satellite can deliver against some of those capabilities a little bit more rapidly? And Sam, I'll start with you this time around.
The Space ISAC doesn't build or operate these systems. All we do is we provide information that allows our members to operate these systems more effectively and more safely with better cybersecurity and resilience. But having said that, we do have working groups at which these principles are being explored, and we're trying to use these principles to translate them into practical best practices. One of the issues that we try to make ourselves sensitive, Dan, is that if you take a look at these principles, so you look at the principles in Space Policy Directive 5, they're all useful. But one of the questions people have to ask is what is the affordability issue, right? If I add a feature, if I add a requirement to my platform, will it make it heavier? Will it make it bigger? Will it require more power? Will it be more costly? So one of the areas of focus that I think is most important, and I've advocated this and will continue to, is that I think we need a national research and development strategy that will allow us to apply these principles to commercial space systems in a way that is more lightweight, more practical, and more affordable. That's really what I think is the challenge. I agree with the application of these principles. The challenge is making the application of these principles absolutely as practical as possible. And I have a concern that if we don't do that, we'll drive the industry offshore. Now, right now, the industry is largely characterized by U.S. leadership. There's plenty of competition. That's fine. That's healthy. I like it when our partners and allies are also our competitors. I think that's good for all of us. But on the other hand, I don't want to hamper our market by making it unaffordable or making it impractical.
Right.
So that's one of the things that I think is most important, Dan. Thank you.
I think that's a great point, right? And it's often about finding the right tool for the job, and it's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all solution that needs to be applied thoughtfully. Nope. Kevin, a bit to add there?
Yeah, so you could see me chomping at the bit. So what was interesting when I joined OneWeb Technologies a little over a year ago, and I read through those 5. And I looked at the architecture of what had been delivered on Gen 1 and what was being baked into Gen 2 and designed in Gen 2. It was all designed for that. That is exactly where our investments are, because it started in the commercial world. There's a commercial application for everything you just said. Maybe not to the degree of the U.S. military in that sense out of the gate, but all the commercial applications and markets that OneWeb was going after before I joined lined up with all of those requirements. So I'd love to see that those requirements were written down, were clear, and that we were already aligned as a OneWeb. And so in OneWeb Technologies, we just amplified and focused our investment in those areas where we had to raise the bar, close the gaps. And so that is exactly, line by line, where we're investing, whether you think of those military appropriate terminals or the resiliency, the cyber, or what's in our network, our core, our secure GAN network, where we pick up traffic for the U.S. military. That's an incremental investment we made in OneWeb Technologies. So we're so well aligned with those 5 requirements. It was actually, I was very happy when I joined and I saw how well aligned we were. But to your first half of the question, what can we do? That goes back to the heart of it, is we can leverage commercial technology advancements to drive our speed of innovation. And to answer Sam's point, is to keep our development costs down. It doesn't have to be proprietary start over. There's plenty of great technology out there to leverage, whether it's in the wireless technology world or things that are happening in cyber for terrestrial networks, have direct application in SATCOM. We shouldn't invent it ourselves. And if we do, we're going to paint ourselves right back into the proprietary corner, right? So Sam, one of my reactions to what you said that I would want the U.S. government to be careful of is that they didn't put an incubator in place and start this development, and then 6 years later hand something cool back to the commercial world to adopt. I'd want to co-develop to make sure that we were digesting it rapidly as we went along, and that would be a great form of government funding where they're co-developing with us. I think that's a really cool and interesting thought, because those people at MIT Lincoln Labs, man, they are smart. Right. And so there's plenty of smart people for us to co-develop with. And I'd love to partner with some of those agencies and think of how we could rapidly co-develop.
Well, let me respond to that if I could, Dan. Dan, just for a second. Kevin is absolutely right. I mean, and there's good precedent for this. If you take a look at the Manhattan Project, if you take a look at the development of nuclear energy, or getting human beings on the moon, or going after HIV/AIDS, when we have brought industry, academia, the national labs, the FFRDCs, and government together, given them common goals and some common resources, and said, these are the half dozen key challenges we've got to face, and here's the time frame by which we've got to solve them. This sort of whole of country, whole of nation approach, not whole of government, but a whole of nation approach, actually has paid off for us. It's also a terrific advantage that we have, because we have richer sectors, and more of them than other countries. Other countries, for example, China, it's more of a command economy. There's less diversity in thinking. Here, you can bring in a wider range of viewpoints and a wider range of resources to go after these problems. So that's another reason that I very much support this kind of an approach. Thank you.
It's been really exciting to see, I think, kind of a higher level of collaboration across the industry, right? And I can point to personally probably a dozen times over the last year or so where we sat down at the table amongst competitors and folks that would have viewed each other as competitors, and really had a very cooperative discussion that resulted in new business models being put forward that were adopted via new transactional methods of acquisition, which it's fantastic to see. Scott, I'll kick it over to you to wrap this one up.
Yeah, and not to overuse the term "jump on the bandwagon," I kind of like what Kevin said, because when you look at those attributes and sort of the key requirements coming out of the government, that's exactly what industry looks at as well. We do it for different reasons. We do it for ROI and revenue and all the financials. The government wants it, and the military wants it, for successful missions. So, both of us, are looking to try to get to the same endpoint, if you will. If you look at what Iridium has done over the last 20 years, trying to drive automation, efficiency into our operations. We were privileged to get the nod from SDA to fly, or just say to operate and fly, their Tranche 1 satellites, which we're working with right now under General Dynamics, as our prime contractor. But it's, bringing government industry together to help each other understand what the end states are trying to get to, because the means in which we get there, we both are fighting and moving in the same direction. So how do we leverage each other to try to get to that end point where we each can benefit from it?
It's a great point. I love the bullet about automation thrown in there too, right? Because that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, facing the DoD today. The approach that's today very highly manual, very much geo-focused, has to become a lot more automated. Even as you bring in initial LEO constellations, but that hybrid space architecture becomes exponentially more complex. I think that's a great area for information sharing, especially for some of those pioneering companies that had to get out and solve those problems ahead of the rest of the industry. So there's been, I think, a lot of discussion, and we've hit on it a few times today, about buying more commercial. I think it's widely understood. It's important. It adds meaningful value to the government. Can you guys talk a little bit about how you're seeing their repositioning towards being a better partner, things that maybe are still sticking points that are necessary to resolve, as well as some of the things that have gone well? And you can point to things like the NRO's CSPO, the stand-up of the space ISAC as part of public-private partnership for information sharing, right? I think there's been the Space Force Commercial Space Program Office stood up. So clearly meaningful steps forward. We're not all the way there yet. From each of you, what have you seen that's worked well? What are the things that still keep you up at night? And Kevin, I'll start off with you.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think that, and we touched upon this briefly earlier, but the shift towards buying as a service is happening. Right? It's not going to happen. It's already there. There's multiple contracts out now where they want to buy as a service. I think that's a huge positive, because it's going to speed up the procurement cycle greatly. So I see that as a massive positive of a different way the U.S. military is buying. Check. I think the effort Space Force put in to go through the PLEO contract to first set up a framework under which to buy. And it was a long process to get the framework in place, but now they can rapidly turn out task orders. I think that's unprecedented. I've never seen a task order come out, be issued and awarded in less than 10 days in quite some time, at least in my experience with the U.S. military. So I think that's a massive positive. I think the challenges I'm still experiencing firsthand, or the company is, there is still this level of comfort that's going to have to happen between Space Force and the end user, right? They're going to have to figure out, the requirements I have, do you really have them? If I mipper you my money, is what I'm going to get back what I expect? So there's this kind of dance or courting period where they're going to have to get comfortable with each other. And so we'll see how that plays out. But I think Claire and her team are doing an amazing job, though, at walking that walk and talking that talk and saying, we're going to deliver this. So I'm very, very optimistic when I see this. So I think we'll get there. I don't think Space Force has been happy with the pace at which things are happening, but I love the fact that they're not happy, which means they want to run even faster. I think that's fantastic. I think Claire's got a great attitude about this and a great vision for it. I think that, the buy-in from those branches, right? They're used to the way they did things for so long. And no offense to the U.S. military, right? But once they're set in their ways, they're set in their ways. It's hard to, as someone just said it earlier in the call, it's hard to turn that aircraft carrier. So that's some of the challenges I think we're facing, or we're seeing personally, is, are people willing to now make the jump to something new? And I think the last challenge, I think, Sam, you hit on it, is if we're really going to get this hybrid architecture, interoperable thing going, there has to be this commonality pool of way of the end user just says, I want that. It's in the database. I click it. I want it. It comes to me. And it's transparent, or it's invisible to them of who it is, what it is. That's going to be the other challenge. And I see Mike Dean in the CIO group driving that architecture. They call it the reference architecture. I think their vision is spot on for where I wish we were there as a country yesterday, because I think it would make us way more nimble and flexible, and our war fighters would be way more effective. But I think that's going to speed it up. So I think the challenge we face is adopting these new financial models and these new the technology models. They'll get there. We just need, I think, as a commercial enterprise, right? We need to be patient. We need to be flexible. But I think on the flip side, the U.S. government's going to have to be more aggressive in doing things differently, and we're all going to have to be a little uncomfortable, and it needs to happen quick because of all the tensions that are happening. That's my soapbox.
No, I think that's a really interesting thing, and the sense of urgency that's there, I think, is felt universally, right? You love to see these conversations where both sides of the table want it to happen faster, and there's some steps that have to get worked through that always take longer than anyone would like. But it has been exciting to see the amount of passion both within government and on the industry side. Yeah. Scott, couple thoughts to add to that?
Yeah. Again, I'll fall back on my experience, having worked with DISA, for 20 years now under the ComSatCom branch. And to your point, Kevin, they had built up this, cost reimbursable program, utilizing working capital funds, Defense Working Capital Fund. And then under the 2018 NDA, I think it was, all ComSatCom was to shift out of DISA and into then Air Force Space Command, and then the creation of U.S. Space Force. And I think the expectation was, the way the DoD is buying MilSatCom, why can't we leverage that in the efficiencies and the economies there and procure commercial SATCOM? Great vision. Unfortunately, two different types of acquisition models. And I would say that, as you alluded to earlier, Daniel, we're coming out of the end of it, but I think it was not, exactly what was expected both from industry and DoD. I thought it would be, more of a, 2-year time frame to transition over. And here we are now entering the FY24, and we're still trying to fight our way through it. And I mean, we as in, as a country. So I think Space Force has definitely matured significantly over the last number of years, and they're building in the processes, the tools, getting the funding in place to procure ComSatCom much better than they have in the initial 2 or 3 years. So that's all good. Programs like CASR, reserve access to commercial SATCOM, great concept, great idea. I see things like that being the impetus to kind of help improve on the acquisition side. So not as quickly as I think either side had hoped, but I think we're approaching the end of it and moving more towards a much effective acquisition model for ComSat.
Yeah, I think that's it's a great point on CASR, right? Because it's a perfect example of, hey, this is slow, but a big part of the reason is it's hard and there's a lot of things to think about. And I feel like every discussion that you see or, participate on, you're rolling that program out, somebody brings up a new twist or a new challenge that really needs to be thoughtfully worked through before something like that's broadly deployed.
One thing I wanted to add, Daniel and team, is I find something very positive in that the way the military asks you now to participate in some of these programs and exercises is far easier than it has ever been, right? Northern Edge, Red Flag, all of those. I mean, they want you to come in and show your stuff because they want to take it for a trial. But the way that they bring you in is way more straightforward than it ever was. But the prize or action after it is way more tangible and concrete, right? We can see action as a result of our participation in Northern Edge, Red Flag, and some others. It's resulting in instant follow-on proof of concepts and demos. I mean, it happens. And so I didn't want to, it just came to me as you were speaking, Scott, right? That's a definite positive, I would say, that we're experiencing. And I don't know, Scott, if you guys are, or Sam, if that resonates.
Absolutely. I'd say, participation. I think, look, the pace of the threat, I think, is driving that as well, right? Our adversaries aren't going to wait for us. So, working closely with our government customers, introducing new technology, innovating with them to address that threat in real time is necessary. So it's all positive.
I love that the collaboration seems to be happening pretty consistently earlier in the procurement cycle, right? Rather than things really going through and maturing, there's, early discussions, a lot more prototyping, a lot more, other transaction authority purchases of some level of capacity, some level of, flexible systems. Let's try it. Let's see what works. We'll go back and, tweak this, tweak that based on what we've seen in the field. It makes it easier to connect the dots as a commercial organization. You're not, hey, I'm playing for something that might pay off 5 years from now. There's a little bit of payoff and appreciation for that participation along the way, which I think is really important. Sam, a couple of thoughts for you to add to this topic.
Well, I agree with what I've heard, and I think the progress that we're making, I'm naturally not patient, but I think the progress that we're making is really quite laudable. An area, and I'm pleased to see what's happening with CASR. I would encourage, acceleration. I'm hoping the Space ISAC can facilitate that. I think there's probably a role, and I think the Space ISAC, which was actually sort of a government idea, ISACs are a government idea, but has been subscribed by industry, represents a strong example of the kind of public-private partnership that we need. An area where we are not making as much progress as I had hoped is in the declaration of space systems as a critical infrastructure sector, given the proliferation of missions. I think I saw a piece today about Iridium is pioneering standards for direct IoT to satellite communications. So we're going to see more dependence of other critical infrastructure sectors, including things like precision agriculture and hyperspectral sensing. Every other, our energy, transportation, and all the other sectors are dependent on space. And yet we haven't made that declaration, and that means that there is no internal coordination within the government of information. Industry is doing a pretty good job of coordinating information amongst itself and with the government. On the other hand, if one wants to get information from the government about threats to, mitigation from, operational events that affect space systems, particularly commercial space systems, there really is a broad spectrum of agencies involved, and that we have not yet identified and designated a sector risk management agency, which is such a sector risk management agency is designated for each critical infrastructure sector, slows down, makes more cumbersome, less effective, less agile the government's information sharing with industry. This is still something that I hope will happen eventually. I think it will. But the point that I would make is that, the world is not operating simply at the pace at which we prefer, but it's operating at its own pace. And, our adversaries get a vote, sadly, in the pace of change in the environment. in which we have to function. So we need to accelerate our moves towards coordinating sector risk management for space systems. I think we'll get it right. I'd like to get it right today.
That's always the perennial challenge, right? It's not just about getting it right, because getting it right 2 years late is just as bad as getting it wrong. And I think that's an unfortunate reality. It's good to see. I think a lot of folks are working hard to push some of those decisions in the right direction with the right thought put forward. Really appreciate the thoughts and insights today. I know we're starting to get to the end of the time that we've got allotted. I'd like to close by asking each of you, what's got you the most excited about the next 12 to 24 months in this industry? And when you look back, call it 4 or 5 years ago, I think most people in this industry wouldn't have expected the amount of change that we've seen over the past few years. Things have moved fast. It has dramatically altered the landscape. I'm always an optimist. I love the technology. I think we're going to see that same pace of innovation. We might even see an acceleration. What has you guys excited about the next year or two? Scott, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I would say I'd kind of teeing off from my last comment. I'm excited to see the maturation coming within U.S. Space Force and Space Systems Command, as well as U.S. Space Command, and seeing how they have now integrated themselves into the combatant commands, the services, and the agencies. As a network operator, that excites me because they're on the forefront, if you will, driving ComSatCom into the warfighter mission. So that's one area. Another area that excites me is, you just mentioned it, the need for interoperability. It's not just commercial right now; it's commercial and military. And you can have interoperability between commercial and military, but you also need to have interoperability between commercial networks as well. And so, how do we, like Kevin and myself or other networks, work with each other to provide that sort of mission interoperability that our customers want? And I think being on the side of industry, we have the ability, the expertise to drive that innovation quickly. And I think we'll see that over the next couple of years.
Kevin, a couple of thoughts from you to add on to that.
Yep. So I'll add on. So we've had a couple of sessions where we talked to Scott and his team about, okay, what can we do together, right? Win-win for everybody around. So I love partnering and things like that. When you asked the question, Daniel, my mind went to instantly solving problems. So what I'm excited about is at SIA, we met with J6 of CENTCOM, J6 of InnoPayCom, and they said, hey, several months ago, you showed us a PowerPoint of what you were going to have. And we thought that'd be really cool, but we're here. Do you have it? Right? And we said, yes, here it is. Their eyes lit up and they said, fantastic. Please come and show us that it's real on site. And I said, the meeting is already scheduled. Their eyes lit up. So the fact that I have something physical today that I can deliver that solves their problems, because they told me they either have no other solutions or limited alternatives or none. And to see the smile on their face and look in there and say, oh my, you have what you said you'd have, and you delivered, and we can use it. It met their expectations. Sometimes it exceeded, but it's that happiness or that excitement out of them to say, great, I'm going to add a tool to the warfighter that's going to meet their needs. And you did what you promised, and we're all going to be better off for it. So I like solving problems. I love solving customer problems. That's what motivates me. And the fact that I showed up there and we had those meetings and they said, come, let me show it to my team because this is going to be great. So that's what excites me is capitalizing on the traction and the market traction we've built over the past, X months before I got here and since I got here, but now turning it into reality. And it's going to be amazing. And it just makes me proud to show up at every one of those meetings saying, here's what we have. I think we can help you.
It's one of the most exciting things about selling a commercial service, right, is the opportunity to show up and kind of prove it, right? The opportunity to not just have slideware of what things might be 4 years from now, but to be able to show what exists today. It's operationally usable and can be deployed, as quickly as they can procure it.
Yep.
Sam, a couple of thoughts from you on this?
Well, I'm excited by several things. First, I'm excited by the government's recognition of the services and capabilities an industry can provide, and the fact that government really is demonstrating strong recognition of this. The business of as a service, that's absolutely right. I think, Kevin, you said it. that decision is already in our rearview mirror. We're already seeing the government not just acquire systems and capabilities, but acquiring the product that space systems produce. I think that's terrific. I'm also excited by the fact that bit by bit, I see the government beginning to adopt from industry some of industry's lessons about how to engineer, develop, procure, and operate these systems. What SDA is doing in particular, I think, is evidence of this. But lastly, I'm extraordinarily excited by just the range of new technologies and missions that we're seeing in the commercial space sector. Laser, optical communications between satellites, that's coming. IoT directly to satellites, that's coming. Manufacturing in space, that's coming. The next space station will be a commercial space station, that's coming. That opens up for our country a whole entire new economic sector. It's a sector that's going to grow very quickly in our country, probably faster than in any other country, and maybe faster than many other sectors. It'll give our country's economic security, just sort of the next chapter in exciting growth. People wonder what will happen. Is the United States going to be more of a service economy? Is it going to be come back to being a manufacturing economy? In large part, it's going to become the world's first space economy. That's exciting. That's something that's going to happen. And the fact that so many of these businesses are here, some 3,000 companies involved in commercial space are here, that we're launching at an unprecedented rate, that we're pioneering new missions and new technologies. I think that's terrifically exciting. And I think apart from what the government acquires from commercial space, the country's overall strength will be enhanced by what happens in the commercial space sector. Thank you, Dan.
It's a great point. I love that kind of subtle bit that you stuck in there, right? Ultimately, it's easy for us as industry to kind of point out the things that we wish moved faster, we wish were done more thoughtfully with government procurement. But there's a couple of great examples, including the approach to managing the SDA constellation, where they went and looked at commercial providers that had been doing that sort of thing for a number of years prior to that, and they said, we want to be mindful of that. And we want to learn from that experience rather than going and trying to reinvent the wheel. And I'm not sure that's something that would have been done 15 or 20 years ago. I'm not sure that the tools or mechanisms or the mentality were there at that point. Really appreciate the thoughts from all of the panelists. Thank you guys all for joining. Some great discussion. I think if I had another hour to spend asking you guys questions, I would take advantage of it. But unfortunately, we're out of time today. I'll hand it back over to you guys in the studio. Really appreciate everyone joining.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks, guys.